Hello class, today's lesson is all about your skeleton. Now we've covered the muscles and now it's time for the bones. The skeleton is the central structure of the body and it is made up of bones, joints and cartilage. The skeleton provides the basic framework for your muscles and gives the body its defined human shape. So the structure of the skeletal system and the vertebral column. The first thing you need to do is to understand the basic diagram of the entire skeletal system. The detailed diagram that's been given out to you in your textbooks, and memorize the names of all the bones that are showcased in that diagram. That's first. Next, we have the vertebral column or the spine, which is literally the most important and the crucial part of the entire skeletal system. The vertebral column is divided into 5 main sections and each contains a specific number of vertebrae. Now there are 33 total vertebrae. The upper 24 vertebrae are articulating and separated from each other, whereas there are 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae and the 5 lumbar vertebrae. Now these are the articulating vertebrae. However, the lower 9 vertebrae are fused. The sacrum consists of 5 fused vertebrae and the coccyx is made up of 4 fused together. Now, there can be a question asked, how many bones are there in total in the vertebral column? So your answer would be 7 cervical. Now, boys, I need you to pay attention to this. When such a question is asked in the examination, you need to be very clear, very precise, and very detailed in your listing out of the number of vertebrae present in the different sections of the vertebral column. So you will start with 7 in the cervical region, 12 in the thoracic region, then 5 in the lumbar or the lower spinal region, 5 in the sacrum and 4 in the coccyx. So total 33. Another question which I can probably ask you, which 3 bones are found in your arm? So how will you answer it? If you will study the skeletal system diagram carefully in your textbook and memorize the names of all the bones that are shown there, you will know the answer. So it's humerus, radius and ulna. It's pretty simple, but you need to memorize the names of all the bones. Now let's talk about the types of bones which are present in your skeletal system. Now within the skeleton, there are 4 main types of bones. First, we have the long bones. So let's say, for example, the femur. So what are the characteristics of the long bones in general? So what you can say is long bones are cylindrical in shape. They're found in the limbs and their main function is to act as a lever. Then we have what are known as the short bones. One common example of the short bones are the carpals in your body. They are small, they are compact, and they are often equal in length and width. So these types of bones are basically designed for strength and weight bearing. Another category of bones are the flat bones. One very common example in your body, you can always say ribs. So what are the characteristics of the flat bones? They have a flat surface. So their name is derived from their very shape. Because they have a flat surface, they are known as flat bones. What is their function? Their function is for protection for the internal organs of your body. And lastly, we have the irregular bones, and these are the vertebrae. So these are complex individual shapes, varieties of functions, including protection and muscular attachment. Now let's talk about another very important aspect of the skeletal system, the main functions of the skeletal system. What are the main functions? And this is another very commonly asked question in your examinations, so please pay attention to it. You have all the main functions of the skeletal system listed out in your textbook also. So I would suggest that you sit back after today's class, open your textbook and study the skeletal system from the textbook and memorize all the different functions of the skeletal system which have been listed out there. But however, in today's class, I'm still going to quickly revise them for you. So let's talk about the main functions of the skeletal system. There are 5 main functions, boys. Let's cover them one by one. The first function is movement, the primary function, students. In fact, the most important function, the skeleton allows movement of your body as a whole and its individual parts. So the bones act as levers, for example, the long bones, and also they form joints that allow the muscles to pull on them and produce joint movements. Second important function is for your support and protection. The bones of the skeleton provide support for the body, and they also protect the organs which are found in it. For example, the cranium protects your brain, the ribs offer protection to the heart and the lungs, and the vertebrae protect the spinal cord, and the pelvis provides protection to the sensitive reproductive organs. The third important function is production of the blood cells. So certain bones in the skeletal system, particularly some specific bones in your skeletal system, they contain the red bone marrow. And the bone marrow is the one which produces the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. Examples of bones that contain this marrow are the pelvis, the sternum, the vertebrae, and the clavicle. The fourth important function of the skeletal system is storage of essential minerals, minerals which are required for the strength and the proper development of your body, of your bones particularly, and certain minerals which are also required for the proper regulation of your several body processes. So what are these minerals? Which bones help there? The bones themselves are made of certain minerals, and they act as a mineral store or a reservoir for, let's say, calcium, phosphorus, which can be given up if the body requires the minerals for some other functions. Now, the last but not the least is the fifth function of the skeletal system, which is the attachment of the bone to the muscle. So the bones of the skeleton provide surfaces for the attachment of muscles. This is why bones are often irregularly shaped, and they have very bony points and grooves to provide attachment points. Now we have several joints in the skeletal system. So we covered the bones, we covered the different types of bones which we have, we covered the entire vertebral column, we covered the basic main functions of the skeletal system, and now let's talk about the joints which are present in the skeletal system. So what is a joint? A joint is a place where two or more bones meet or articulate, and that is why it is known as articulation. Articulation occurs at any point where two or more than two bones are meeting. What are the roles and responsibilities of these joints and the connective tissue? So let's take these point by point. I would suggest that you pause this video when you are listening to it and keep making your points in your physical education notebook like we used to do when we were having real-time face-to-face classes. So quickly just grab your physical education notebooks, put down today's date, and start making your points. Let's talk about the joints and the connective tissue. So the connective tissues consist of ligaments, cartilage, and tendons. A joint is held together by ligaments, which give the joints their stability. Cartilage is found at the ends of bones and where the joints meet. And tendons attach the muscles to the skeleton. Now let's talk about the different types of joints. So the most commonly known joints and the most common or the prevalent joints throughout our body are the synovial joints. They are also known as freely movable joints because they provide maximum range of motion to the different parts of your body. These synovial joints actually, students, write it down, they allow us the free movement to perform skills and techniques during your physical activity. Write it down. Synovial joints have synovial fluid in the joint cavity that lubricates or oils or greases the joint so that it can move very smoothly. Synovial fluid is made by the synovial membrane. In synovial joints, the ends of the bones are covered together with cartilage, also known as articular cartilage, which cushions the joint and prevents any friction or wear and tear between the bone ends. Now, cartilage is a soft, spongy connective tissue, you can say that, and the articular capsule, which is there, that prevents the actual wear and tear on the bones. Now, the bones in the synovial joint are connected by ligaments. Now, make another column for the word ligaments. What are ligaments? Many a time students of physical education have a very basic doubt about the difference between ligaments and tendons. So let's clear that out in today's virtual class. Yeah, write down the heading ligaments. So write down point by point, and once again you can keep pausing this video according to your speed of writing and jot down all these points for yourself once again in your notebook. Why should you jot them down? I'm going to tell you why. Because every time you write down something, it helps you to seep in the knowledge and remember it for a longer period of time as compared to just listening to it from your teacher. So right now, as you're watching the video, you can listen to my voice, and I know that you will remember this information, but probably for half an hour or 1 hour, and then you may tend to forget it. So it's always a good idea to write it down in your notebooks. Now you get two advantages of that. When you write it down in your notebook, first of all, it is there in the form of written information, which you can always refer to for your future revisions and for your future examinations, which will happen later on in school. Another reason, when you write down any piece of information, it has been scientifically proven that when you write down something, it helps you to remember that information and memorize that information for a longer period of time as compared to when you are just listening to that same piece of information. So when you listen to a piece of information, you remember it, but for a shorter period of time. And when you listen to it and you tend to write it down, the very process of writing it down on a piece of paper with a pen allows your brain to memorize and remember that information for a long period of time. And that's because the brain is able to get more and more time to take in and absorb that piece of information. So let's talk about ligaments. What are they? Now, write down first point. Ligaments are a type of connective tissue. They are tough, they are fibrous, and they are slightly elastic in nature. They connect bone to bone, as I've already told you, and they help to keep the joints together. They also stabilize the joints during movement and prevent any possible dislocation, by restricting the actions of the players outside the normal range of motion. And they can also absorb shock because of their elasticity, which protects the joint, and they also help to maintain correct posture and movement of your body. The movement at a synovial joint is caused by the muscles which are attached across the joint, and muscles are attached to the bone by tendons. So now you come to the second important term, which is tendons. What is the basic difference between the two, ligaments and tendons? Ligaments allow for the attachment of bone to bone, and tendons attach muscle to bone. So let's talk about tendons now. Now, tendons are very strong. They're highly inelastic connective tissues that allow a muscle to pull on a bone to move it. And as all of you know, that muscles can only pull and they cannot push. So when the muscle gets attached to the bone via a tendon, it pulls at the bone across the joint. And because it pulls at the bone across the joint, naturally movement is bound to happen. So that's what they do. Now, ligaments connect bone to bone. Again, I'm going to repeat. Tendons connect muscle to bone. I'm repeating it. Types of synovial joints. Now write down the next subheading. What are the different types of synovial joints in our body? So we have 4 different types of synovial joints in our body, which are responsible for a range of sporting movements. Write down number 1, you have the hinge joint. Now these can be found, in your elbow, knee, ankle. Hinge joints are like the hinges on a door, and they allow you to move the elbow and the knee in only one direction. They allow for flexion, extension of a joint at the ankle. Different terms are used. So when the toes are pointed downwards, it is known as plantar flexion. When the toes are pointed upwards, it is known as Dorsi Flexion. Second type of your synovial joint is your ball and socket joint. Write that down. These types of joints, ball and socket, can be found at your shoulder, your hip, and they allow movement in almost every direction. A ball and socket joint is mostly made up of a round end of one bone that fits into a small cup-like area of the other bone. Third types of joints are your pivot. Now, this joint can be found in your neck, right in your neck between the top two vertebrae. It allows only rotational movement, such as moving your head from side to side as if you were going to say a no. So if I have to say a no to you, this is it. This is the basic pivotal movement which will happen in between the first two vertebrae of my neck. Last type of synovial joint is your condyloid. Write it down. It is Condyloid. The spelling for the name of this joint can be sometimes confusing, so write down the correct spelling. And I have always told you how important it is to write down the correct spelling, especially in your physical education papers, because if you spell condyloid as condyloid or condyloid. There are many ways in which I've seen students spell it out. So if the spelling is wrong, you will get a 0 in that answer. You will lose that mark. So please be very careful. Now, this type of joint is found at the wrist. It allows you to flex and extend the joint and move it from side to side. I can ask you a question here. Which type of joint allows the greatest range of movement? What will your answer be? Ball and socket joint. Remember that. Now, types of joint movement in the skeletal system. We covered the types of joints, and now it only makes sense to move on to the next step, which is the type of joint movement which will occur across these different types or categories of joints. So the different types of movement that are permitted at each joint are described now. First of all, you will write down about the flexion. What is flexion? It is a very commonly used term even by me in most of our classes. So what do you mean by flexion? Bending at a joint. This occurs when the angle of a joint decreases. Example, the elbow flexes when performing a bicep curl. This is one example which I have given to you in your classes so many times that I'm sure you have ratified it by now. So while performing a bicep curl, what is happening at the elbow? The type of movement which is happening across the joint is your flexion. Why? Because the angle at the elbow is decreasing. So that brings us to our next or the second type of movement across the joint, which is extension, straightening of a joint. This occurs when the angle of a joint increases. Once again, for example, at the elbow when putting a shot. Then you have something known as abduction, the movement away from the midline of your body. Now, this occurs at the hip and the shoulder joints during a jumping jack movement. Next, you have adduction, movement towards the middle line of the body. This occurs at the hip and the shoulder. Returning the arms and legs back to their original position from a jumping jack movement can be another example. Next, write down circumduction. But before we talk about circumduction, always remember when we talk about adduction, how can you easily remember the type of movement which is occurring at adduction? Because adduction might seem to be a complicated word. It has got ADD, which means add. So when a limb gets closer to the midline of the body, it is basically getting added to the central portion or the midline of the body. So that's how you can remember it. Adduction is all about addition of a limb to the mid center or the midline of the body. Addition, which means the limb is coming closer to the midline of the body. And that is why it is known as ADD, adduction. That is how you can remember it. Next, we talk about circumduction. Now, this is where the limb moves in a circular shape, in a circle. This occurs at the shoulder joint during the overarm tennis serve. Next, you have rotation. This is where the limb moves in a circular movement around a fixed joint towards or away from the midline of the body. This occurs in the hip in golf while performing a drive shot, for example. Next, we have what is known as plantar flexion, pointing of the toes. Now, this is interesting. This movement only occurs at the ankle. For example, pointing the toes in ballet. That's how ballerinas do it. Next, you have Dorsi Flexion. What happens in the Dorsi Flexion? The foot moves towards the shin as if you are pulling, as if you're pulling your toes up towards yourself. This movement only occurs at the ankle. Now you have what is known as the musculoskeletal system. So let's say we have covered the different types of joints in your body. We have covered the different types of movements which can occur across these different types of joints in the body. Now we have a very interesting combined term, the musculoskeletal system. What do you mean by that? Musculoskeletal system. What does it mean? So basically, it means that your muscular system and your skeletal system, they work in tandem. They work together to create movement in your body. So the muscular system works in conjunction with the skeleton to produce movement of the limbs and the whole body in general. So ligaments and tendons are two main types of connective tissues that help the muscular skeletal system to produce these movements. And once again, this brings us back to the ligaments, which attach bone to bone. They act to give stability to the joints. They are tough, white, and slightly inelastic. Moving on to tendons. What are tendons? Let us revise again. This is a connective tissue which connects your muscle to bone. It carries the force from the muscular contraction to the bone. It is tough, grayish, and inelastic. Now the muscles contract to pull on the bones to produce movements. And joints are able to move in a variety of directions to allow us to perform a range of sporting movements. That is what is happening. So there you go. For today's class, that is all from my side. Now your task is to sit down and, like I keep repeating in our classes, like I used to keep repeating in the past also in our face-to-face classes. I have explained everything from my side. Now it is your task to sit down, to revisit, to revise all the topics that we have covered in today's virtual class, and make sure that you can recall them at a later stage when needed. So you should be able to memorize, you should be able to remember all the important terminologies, all the important concepts that are related to the skeletal system and also the muscular system, because we have already covered it, and what exactly we mean by this musculoskeletal system. So basically all these major systems have been covered in the unit 1 of Cambridge IGCSE physical education. So my advice to you at this stage would be to speeden up your revision with the help of number 1, your textbook, which is a good resource. Number 2, all the handouts which I'm constantly delivering to you through your Google Classrooms forum. Please keep downloading them. And number 3, all the handouts which I gave to you back in the day when you were in grade 9, all the hard copies of the handouts which I used to share with all of you. So with all these collective handouts and the textbook which you already have, please sit down for your revision, not of the entire textbook. Don't just go haywire. Be very focused in your approach. Be very concentrated in your approach. I'm going to guide you with your revision step by step, class by class, week by week. So your first step is to sit down for the revision of your unit 1 and precisely chapter 1 and 2, which are your skeletal system and your muscular system. In today's class, we have more or less covered most of the important aspects and the topics of your skeletal system. So your job is to, like I said, sit down quietly in a quiet corner of your place, open your textbook, open all the handouts, keep this video on YouTube ready, keep it handy. You can play this video as many times as you want to play it, revise with it, or revise through your textbook first and your handouts, and then when you want to just relax, play this video once again, because you will keep listening to my voice, you will keep listening to the same information that you have already studied and covered from your textbook. So once you keep listening to the same information, it goes deeper and deeper into your mind, it goes deeper into your brain and deeper into your memory eventually. So you will remember this information for a longer period of time, and you will tend to forget it less when you have to recall it while writing your examination. So your job is to sit down in a quiet corner at the place, open your textbook, revisit and revise all the major topics which we have covered with the skeletal system today. So all the best for your revision, boys, and stay home, stay safe. Please be very safe. Follow all the rules and the regulations of the lockdown seriously, and help out your parents with all the household chores as well. See you all in your next physical education virtual class. Until then, all the best for your studies and your revision. You can please get in touch with me anytime you want to. You have my phone number with you, you have my email address with you. Any doubts, any queries, any questions, I keep repeating to all of you, and I'm going to say that again at the cost of sounding repetitive. Anytime you have a doubt, get in touch with me without a single iota of hesitation. I love it when my students come to me with their doubts. It can be morning, afternoon, evening, night, late night. There are times when students are studying late at night. There are some night owls who have this habit of studying late into the night. And sometimes what can happen is that when you are studying, you may suddenly come up with a very genuine doubt right then and there as you are studying. So either you can write it down in your notebook and keep it for the morning, get in touch with me right in the morning and clarify that doubt. If it gets too late, if it is, let's say, midnight or post midnight, because by then I'll be sleeping for sure. Otherwise, if you're studying and it's 9 or 10 or 11 and you get a doubt immediately, you want to clarify it then and there, because the nature of the doubts can change. Sometimes you can have doubts which can probably wait till the morning and they will not disturb your current studies. But sometimes there are doubts which are right there in the middle of something. And if you don't clarify that doubt, it's a very irritating doubt. If you don't clarify it right then and there, then it tends to hamper or disturb the rest of your studies. So please pick up the phone, call me, or drop me a message on WhatsApp, or just email me quickly, because I will be working on my laptop till about 10 or 11 in the night for sure. So if I quickly grab your email, I will respond to you. I will drop you a message. So get in touch with me. If my students come up with 5,000 doubts, I will clarify 5,001 times, happily, gladly, and with all the love and support that I can offer. So get in touch with me with your doubts, because your doubts and your questions actually tell me that you have been studying, that you are sincere, that you have been diligent and disciplined about your work, and you are constantly in touch with the subject of physical education. It tells me that. It tells me that you are being regular with your studies. It tells me that you are consistent. So that's a good sign. That's a good impression which you will be forming in my mind that way. So come up with as many doubts as you can. Let them be silly doubts. Let them be very smart, intelligent doubts. Who cares? Doubts are doubts, whether big, whether small. So get in touch with me and keep studying during this lockdown. Spend time with your family and parents. And also take out some time every once in a while for your hobbies and passions, and do something that you like to do, something that would give you happiness, something that you enjoy doing. And this is also a good time for some rest and relaxation every once in a while. But having said that, yes, today's class is all about skeletal system. So please make sure that you sit down with your textbook and revise everything today itself, so that it right now it's fresh in your mind as we have covered this class. So if you sit down immediately after this class is over with your textbook, whatever fresh information you have gathered once again will quickly get absorbed by your brain like a dry sponge. When you sit down with your textbook, you just heard everything, you just heard all the information. The moment you quickly revise it with your textbook by reading all the information, your brain will drink it up. So do it today itself. That's my advice to you. All the best.